My knowledge of the TRC and the call to action is fairly limited in that I remember the impact when it was first announced in 2015, and I thought, oh, this is going to be exciting. But then I haven't heard very much more since then.
Right off the bat, I've been around a long time in First Nations politics, and I've seen so many commissions and studies and things go on that I've been very skeptical of the whole TRC process. But nonetheless, I think it is essential, that people take a look at, these various issues and categories that are outlined in the report. And I think my main concern is that reconciliation has become a buzzword for the federal government and other parties.
My understanding of Truth and Reconciliation is that it is meant to acknowledge the devastating impacts that colonization and capitalism has had on Indigenous peoples.
Truth and reconciliation to me is an opportunity for us as Indigenous people, as Anishinaabe people, to take a good look at what actually has been in our history, how we were treated, and to communicate, to have some dialogue with the settlers, I guess, because they're the ones who did all these horrors to us. So it's I believe it's a good opportunity for us to come together, to communicate, and to really do some of this action that was called for in that report.
The first part of that is probably the most important element of it is, the truth has to come out. Unfortunately, the history that we've learned in our school settings doesn't take into account First Nations history. Only now most Canadians are starting to learn about some of the injustices and tragedies that have happened in First Nations. And so there's a lot of work to go into the various category levels that are part of the Truth and Reconciliation report. So I think that's what is important to me is the action part, not just the fact that there's a report out there.
To me, Truth and Reconciliation means that my granny, my aunties and uncles, and all Indigenous peoples' truths are heard and recognized.
The history of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, was developed in response to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission began its work in June 2008. The overall goals for the TRC Commission was to promote healing, education, listening, and preparations of a report regarding recommendations for the Government of Canada regarding the Indians' residential school legacy.
My first thoughts when the TRC talked about the calls to action were as grandmother, as mother, and children already out there in the work world. I really wondered, how was this going to impact us? Because we've had to deal with that underlying racism, that underlying barriers, to achieving whatever we may want to do as individuals. And especially when I look at young people, and when I say young people, I don't only mean my children, but all young people. And as a former teacher, I see the potential. And I thought, good, maybe we can do something about this.
6 years have passed since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released the final report. 29 calls to action have projects underway, with 32 calls to action have projects proposed, and 20 calls to action have not had any movement. Noojmowin Teg Health Centre is implementing, in relationship to the TRC calls to action, programming. We'll be speaking to language and culture, health, and education calls to action. Since the calls to action, we've been working with traditional health, working with the medicines, the language, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, commemorative sites and projects, Healthy Kids Community Challenge Program, FASD programming, and advocating for Jordan's principle. The development of an internal TRC working group was fulfilled within the organization based on the recommendation from Danielle Wilson, the Executive Director of Noojmowin Teg.
I think that local organizations need to implement more land-based programs, specifically targeting youth. I think that by implementing land-based programs that we will be revitalizing language, culture, and traditions.
Creating awareness, and they also need to prioritize who does what. There's various organizations around here, plus First Nations, and they should avoid duplicating, and people should take on, have a strategy plan with a critical path attached to it that outline who does what by what time. Creating awareness and a lot of publicity about this, and some very tangible action items.
To look at local communities and what they could do to implement any of those calls to action. I think we should start talking among ourselves, because when I look at reconciliation, I know there's a lot of hurt within our own communities, because many of our First Nations, because of the Indian Act, we have been really hard on each other. We've been isolating certain members and expelling them and alienating our people.
For the next generations, I think our people have to make a very crucial decision about what's going to happen in our communities. Education versus addictions. Right now we are very tragically involved in mental health and addiction issues in our communities, and education is the key. Colonizers used education and poverty to hurt our people, and that's been since first contact. And education is going to be the key for us to turn things around in our communities, so that people have the capacity to take on the various components of the development of their communities.
I hope that for my generations and generations to follow, that we will begin to advocate more for ourselves through passion towards the wrongdoings that have happened to our relatives.